Hey everybody, so this is Josh Bruce and we're just going to continue making this string class for the uninitiated. If you haven't seen the previous video, basically I started working on a string class inside of an app for the iPhone called DraftCode, and basically one of the drawbacks to doing that, while it does allow me to run PHP code, I don't believe there's a way to run automated tests that I'm accustomed to. So basically I have sort of these manual tests, and what I would end up doing is I would basically work on the code for a little bit, and then I would go over to a web page where it would give me this printed output. So basically if we do this, right, and I would have to read through and make sure that all of the printed output was what I expected. Now, one of the things that I just sort of learned myself is that I actually don't need MAMP or PHP to be running in order to run the unit test. So we're going to try this without a PHP server running and see how it goes. So anyway, the idea is to take this class that I've been working on and developing conceptually as a scratchpad, bring it into a quote-unquote real-life class, but using TDD to sort of get there. And one of the things that I'm sort of doing is I'm mimicking, or trying to mimic, Swift, at least for now. And so this is the documentation for the string class in Swift, and as you can see, it has a lot of initializers, different initializers that you can use. And basically Swift has something that PHP doesn't, which is the ability to overload a function or a method. And so basically what that means is you can give a function the same exact name, but as long as the entire signature is different, then Swift will look at it as being something different, right? So as you can see, we have different argument types and numbers of arguments that are given to these initializers. We just don't have a built-in way to do that in PHP, which isn't necessarily a great fault of PHP or anything like that, but it is there. So to replicate that behavior, what I have a tendency to do, and this is what I prefer, is to create static initializers. So what I mean by that is basically we're going to have public function test can initialize empty, right? And the result of that is, what I want to do is, instead of new string like we did above, is we're actually going to do string empty. Okay, and I should be able to do this: assert not null, result. Come up here, run PHP unit. There's an error, and that's because there was a call to an undefined method of empty. I'm going to copy and paste the function calls. I don't generally recommend that because basically what it does, by having to type it twice, if you had a typo in your first one but you don't have that typo in the second one, you'll still get the same error and you'll fix the typo, right? Same thing if first versus second and that sort of a deal. But if you copy and paste a misspelled function name, then it matches, so it's not going to have a problem. So it's not going to take any arguments. Now, when you look at this declaration or this signature, I go a little bit out of order compared to some of the PHP Fig standards. What I like is to know whether or not something is considered a class function or an instance method and first, and then the visibility and accessibility of that, so public, private, or protected, and then of course function has to be there, and then the name of the function. And also I try to put in return values as much as I can. So, so it's a static public function named empty, right? And basically, it really doesn't do anything, right? That should be it. That should pass, and it does. So it's returning an empty string. But this test doesn't really test whether or not it's empty. So what we want to do is test empty string is empty. So we're going to go ahead and get the result, and it's an empty string. And what we want to do is we want to verify that it's empty. So I'm going to say raw, and what this method is going to do is actually give us the raw string, and our output string. We can always rename it later. I don't think string is going to work because string is a reserved name. So let's give it a shot. So we're going to do this, and we're going to say this assert true, which is that the result is empty. Call to undefined method, string. So let's go ahead and do this. This is going to be an instance method, so we're not going to say static at the beginning. So again, this is just a nice way of being able to, at least for me, being able to build functions really easily. Is it a class method or is it an instance method? Done, right? So function string. Now, what is it going to return? In this case, we want it to return an empty value. So the simplest code that we could write for this is going to be that, right? And this, of course, will change over time. This is sort of one of the tenets of TDD, is that you want to do the least or the minimal production code necessary to get the test to pass. And I break that rule all the time. So, okay, so we can have a function named string, but we can't have a class named string. So that's a little different. So at that point where you've proven that it is an empty string, so good on us. So next, we want to be able to, according to the next initializers, or the next set of initializers, we want to be able to create a string containing given characters, right? So test can initialize with string. So, and one of the things that we want to do is we want to make sure that it can handle multi-byte, right? So UTF-8 characters. So if people who talk in emoji, they can totally do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say hello, comma, and then on the Mac I'm going to hit Control Command Space, and that's going to bring up a character palette. I'm going to choose the world here, exclamation mark, right? So that's what we're expecting. Now the result is string from string. Just copy and paste this. And we're going to get the string, and this assert equals expected result. I really need to figure out a way to get my license over to this user on my computer. All right, so from string doesn't exist, so let's go ahead and make that. Again, this is a class function, so static So it's a class function, so that's static. We want anybody to be able to access calling this function, so it's public. It is a function, not a variable. And from string, we're going to have to give it an initial string. An initial string. Do I want to make that optional? No, then you should call a different initializer. We're going to return the instance of string. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, return new string, and I'm going to pass in initial. Now, this isn't going to make the test pass, but I just want to show that it's still failing. And part of the reason that it's failing, or at least the major reason that it's failing, is because we have to override the constructor for this class. So string initial, PHP already knows what it's going to do there. And we're also going to want to store this, right? So this is where we get into a property member on this class. So I'm going to mark it as private because I don't want anybody to be able to set it. I only want them to be able to get it in some way. And so by making it private, nobody can write to that property. So just a little bit of protection, which is typically a good thing. So we're going to call it string. We're going to make it an empty string, and basically this string is now initial. Now this is still going to fail, right? Because this string is still returning empty string instead of this string. And that failed. And so if we read why it failed, because you see we've got 3 errors here, too few arguments passed to function construct, right? So down here in the constructor, we made it a required field, right? But the empty string doesn't need to pass anything to it, so let's just go ahead and make it an empty string. And there you go. So now we have a way to initialize with a string, and we also have a way to retrieve the string back. In one of the later videos, I'm going to probably put in comments about what all this handles, but basically just that from string method handles this initializer, this initializer, this initializer, this initializer, this initializer, but not this one. Okay, so what this one is trying to do is create a new string representing the given string repeated the specified number of times. Okay, so what does that look like? Let's do this. So public function test can initialize by repeating string. Right? So I'm just going to grab this real quick, and I'm going to say, let's just have the globe over and over and over again. And so we want to do that 3 times. But I'm only going to give it 1 globe. And I'm going to say by repeating. And we're going to do that 3 times. Right. So this method doesn't exist, so we're going to have to go ahead and make it. It's a class method. It's available to everyone. It is a function, and we're going to do by repeating. So we're going to say initial and then count, and it's going to return an instance of string. So we have all of this. We're starting to build a good set of functions that we can actually use. We can actually compose into more complex stuff. So what that kind of looks like, at least for this, this point is going to be build is an empty string for I equals 0 and I is less than count. I should be increased by 1. This way it's going to loop through the it's going to loop the number of times that is equal to count. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have build, we're going to append to build with that initial value, and then once that's finished we should be able to say return string from string our built string. And there you go. So that works. So that covers these two. Oh, now here, this is interesting. So we have an isEmpty method, or an isEmpty property, and a count property. Now the isEmpty property, we can't make it into a property, or we don't want to make it into a property because PHP, you have to jump through a couple of hoops to make calculated properties in PHP. So, and we are also up here, we could just use isEmpty, and we also have the solution, right, to the problem. So let's do this. Test function test string is empty. This assert true string empty is empty. Oh, and I also kind of prefer not to use properties. I prefer to use methods, just for the sake of consistency, right? Like so I don't have to think on this class, is this a property or is this a method? Like everything is just a function, and I'm going to get back whatever I get back. So trying to run that, it fails because isEmpty is not a method. And I also try to use the term method and function deliberately. So generally speaking, for me, I will try to say the word function only when it's a class function, or completely outside in the global scope, and method when it's actually inside of an instance. At least I believe that's the way this works. So empty this string, right? So that's good. And basically, so part of TDD is also that you basically red green refactor is the short version, and there's a lot of different takes on it. But the idea is that you create a test that is red, right? You make it green, and then you refactor your code. And now what a lot of people don't do is that they don't refactor their actual tests. So I'm actually going to do that right now. So right here, instead of having PHP check to see if the result is empty, let's just have the string check to see if it's empty, right? So let's go ahead and do this. Put that up there, delete that, and then we don't need this method anymore because it's redundant, so don't repeat yourself, and there you go. All right, so isEmpty, we've got that sorted, and then count. Now, count is going to might be a little weird, mainly because of the whole emoji thing. So public function test can count characters. All right, so let's do this. All right, so hello is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, because the space does count, 8, 9. So 9 characters. So when we say from string count, expected should be 9. And it's going to fail because count doesn't exist. And a lot of times when you're building classes, at least from my experience, what you're really doing is you're changing the API into the standard library, right? So like empty, this empty function or method is a, the empty function is part of the standard library, but is empty is not. We had to create that. So we do have in PHP something called count, and let's see if that works. That does not work. Failed asserting that 1 matches expected 9. So it's saying that the string is only 1 character, which that really should not be the case at all. So we also have something called string length. 12 definitely doesn't match. With the string methods inside, or string function, with the string functions inside of the standard library, we also have this multi-byte or MB underscore, which basically is supposed to account for things like emojis and other multi-byte characters. So there you go, that passes, so we'll just leave that alone. All right, so now we have those two figured out. These initializers we don't need to worry about because they're very specific. You know, valid UTF-8 unsafe pointer to a C-char and all sorts of stuff. I'm not really going to worry too much about formatting. You know, passing in a formatting string because PHP 7 and I think even 5 dot something had template strings added, so don't need to do that one, at least not at this juncture. Don't need to decode C strings. We don't need to initialize generics. Now this one's weird. So this one's good, and we'll probably want this. In fact, let me make sure that let me go ahead and just delete that. We'll make that. All right, so basically what this does is it wants to initialize a string class, right, with the contents of a file. So public function test can initialize from file. And what we're going to do is I am going to say expected is that. I'm going to say dir is directory, and what that basically does is gets the fully qualified path to the file that I'm in. And then I'm going to say test.txt, right? And so this appends test.txt, so it's going to be looking for, in the folder I'm in, looking for test.txt, and the result is string from file dir string. This assert equals expected result. Okay. Error from file does not exist. So again, this is at the class level. We want people to access it. Function from file string, string path returns an instance of string. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to say contents equals file get contents path return string from string and contents. So yeah, and then no such file or directory, so there's nothing at that path. So let's go ahead and create a new file, test.txt, save that right there, and grab the string, save, and it passes. All right, so now we've got that initializer out of the way, contents of file, right? Like that just takes care of all of those. We're not going to deal with writing, and now we're going to start to get into string manipulation. But we're going to save that for next time. But hopefully you can sort of see how just building up something from scratch is helping to create this sort of functional composition that we can do inside of this class. So it's not a lot of new development. It's just a lot of calling what we already have and gluing it all together. Now I will say that if I wasn't doing implementing these sort of in order that they're coming in the docs, it might end up with a different implementation. And in fact, in some of the later videos, I might actually take some time and say, okay, now we're going to refactor now that we have a more holistic understanding of what this thing does. So anyway, until then, thanks for making the time. I definitely appreciate it, and I'll see you around.